Now on BBC Scotland, key players look at the Scottish Parliament plagued by delays and the gangland war that led to the trial of Paul Ferris, two of the high-profile scandals that shocked Scotland.
In recent decades, Scotland has witnessed many a scandal that has hit the headlines and affected people nationwide.
It was the talk of the town. It was the talk of Scotland.
From miscarriages of justice.
So there's a life there that I've lost that no one can give me back.
To high court dramas.
I've never in 20 years of being a lawyer seen a case like that.
And multi-million budget overspends.
They kept changing their minds as to what they wanted.
To banking bailouts.
Not just an economic collapse, but a political calamity as well.
In this programme, the Parliament building project dogged with delays and rising costs, and the gangland war that led to the trial of Paul Ferris. These are the scandals that shocked Scotland.
This is a good day for Scotland, and it's a good day for Britain and the United Kingdom too.
It's 1997 and change is afoot for Scottish politics. The devolution referendum delivered a majority yes result for the creation of a Scottish Parliament with tax-raising powers. Scotland now had its first Parliament in over 300 years.
There shall be a Scottish Parliament. I like that.
A white paper published by Donald Dewar, the then Secretary of State for Scotland, put forward a plan for where the new Parliament building could be.
There was varying ideas about where the Parliament should be. There was a view it should be in Glasgow. There was also a view that it should be in Stirling as the ancient capital of Scotland.
4 sites were shortlisted, with the white paper costing the project at £10 to £40 million.
Whoever came up with the £40 million figure really needs a good talking to.
And I think this is where the really most significant early mistake was made. That what Donald Dewar tried to do was suppress the cost down, saying, look, this isn't going to cost you very much. This is going to cost you £10 to £40 million. And what happened then was that every single price rise that happened after that became a news story.
The white paper said, you can build a Parliament building, they didn't say this, but a bog standard Parliament building for 10 to 40 million.
By 1998, politicians were keen to get their new parliamentary project off the ground. Donald Dewar had already identified a location next to Holyrood Palace, on the site of an old brewery.
I'm very attracted to the advantages of being able to plan for a greenfield site. I'm certainly very attracted to the historical importance of the Holyrood site.
A competition was launched to find an architect, and Dewar appointed a design panel to choose the winner.
He made sure that there was a contest for the architect against the advice of top civil servants who said, you're opening yourself out to a project that will run over budget, that will run over time, and that will lead to problems.
The winner was to design a building that would complement its surroundings at the bottom of Arthur's Seat.
So these buildings on the right-hand side, which are now part of the Fountain Bridge Brewery, will be demolished, and that's where the new Parliament will be. Great days and great times for Scotland.
After a difficult period for Labour in Scotland, Donald Dewar was glad to have some good news to deliver. The winner of the competition, Enric Morales, said his design was inspired by visits to Scotland in his youth.
The new Parliament will be at the foot of the Royal Mile and adjacent to Holyrood Park. Calling it the People's Building, Mr Dewar said it would give Scotland something of real significance for the future.
And if I should say my very personal opinion is that the panel has made the right choice.
Of the 70 plans considered, the winning design by Spanish architect Enric Morales was a controversial choice.
No, I don't like that.
Looks like another millennium nightmare, doesn't it? Don't like it? No.
The big decision and the big blunder was that the choice of Parliament building and choice of architect, etc., was done by Donald Dewar with a team of advisors when he was Secretary of State for Scotland.
I think it will add tremendously to the architectural heritage of Edinburgh. More importantly, I think it speaks about an open parliament, about an open democracy, about accessibility. It gives a message to the politicians who are going to be elected there.
I think perhaps Donald Dewar and others wanted the decision made before the Parliament actually sat, because then the Parliament might have taken a decision and voted on something different.
But whatever the reasons for it, it turned out to be a blunder, because it meant that the new Parliament, and they felt a great sense of entitlement, they felt they were the democratic representatives of the people of Scotland, and they weren't taking a decision about their own home.
In 1999, building work began on the Holyrood site, and the newly convened Parliament sat in its temporary accommodation at the General Assembly building on the Mound.
This is a proud moment. A new stage in a journey begun long ago, and which has no end. This is a proud day for all of us.
As presiding officer, Sir David Steele was chair of the corporate body in charge of the project, which had already gone way over its £40 million estimate.
The building is now nearly 50% bigger than originally planned. This has caused half of the rise in costs. The rest of the rise was caused by delays, as the corporate body changed the shape of the chamber and building specification.
Where we handed a poisoned chalice, certainly the difference is that it was a theoretical parliament that we were handed. What we had to deal with was an actual parliament. And of course the demands of the actual parliament are different.
It was hoped an off-site visit to a mock-up would help resolve conflict over the new style of debating chamber.
When the debating chamber design was delivered by Enrique Morales, it was like a lecture theatre. David Steele did not want that, the parliamentarians did not want that. So they sent that back to Enrique Morales and said, redesign it.
They kept changing their minds as to what they wanted. Did they want a chamber that was shaped like a horseshoe, or one that was shaped like a banana? So you had banana side, and then you had the horseshoe side, and the horseshoe side said the banana ones were just idiots. And so it went on, and so it went on.
He managed to tweak it into the horseshoe shape that we have now, but it suited nobody.
I was quite sad about that, because here we were in the old politics with people saying, oh, I want to see the enemy across the floor, I want to see the whites of their eyes. It was horrible, but they won the day.
They were trying to get Scotland the best possible parliament building for this new institution, this new democratic institution. But every time you had a slanging match between the banana and the horseshoe side, you could see the till just increasing the cost.
Only 8 months into the build, and an out-of-control budget and major delays were dominating the debate, with some critics demanding the project should be shelved completely.
I think it would be very silly to abandon the site. It will cost enormous sums of money. You'll be writing off many tens of millions of pounds. And you'll have to, of course, ultimately supply a home for the Parliament. So if you start from scratch on a new site, it's likely to cost you even more.
Abandoning the project would involve dishing out redundancy notices to those engaged on existing design and construction, and it would involve, frankly, unquantifiable potential legal claims for compensation.
It became an icon, a totem for concerns and anxieties about not just the building, but about the project of devolution itself. It became known within the circles of Parliament, it became known as TBB, that bloody building.
Would any member buy a house on this sort of basis? We are being asked to put all our eggs in one basket, which has consistently proved to have holes in it.
You had a conflict between Donald Dewar, who was used to running the department with a couple of ministers and answering only to the Prime Minister, and a new group of parliamentarians and MSPs who wanted to set the agenda for what they wanted for the Parliament.
Nothing has done more to tarnish the reputation of this Parliament than the handling of the Holyrood building project.
Andrew, why are so many members of the Scottish Parliament unhappy with this work on the new Parliament building?
Well, Anna, it really comes down to costs. Originally, when the decision to go for the Holyrood site was made, the public were under the impression it would cost £40 million to build. Shortly after that, they were told if you include VAT, the purchase of the land, these sort of costs, that went up to £80 million. Now, the projected costs for this new project are going to be £109 million.
As the costs kept rising, so did tensions between the press and Parliament.
It became fodder for us journalists because we knew that every couple of weeks, every month, there would be a new estimate on how much the building was going to cost, what had gone wrong, what had changed. It gave us lots of things to write about, but at the same time we were very aware of the effect that that had on the populace at large. That this great devolution project, which had been heralded, was starting to crumble.
Determined to rein the spending in, MSPs voted for a budgetary cap of £195 million. Nearly 3 months later, a Holyrood Progress Group was established.
The Holyrood Progress Group was set up to translate the demands that the other MSPs had into something coherent, which could then be translated into the building.
So there we were, meeting weekly on site at the front line of trying to explain to the general public what was going on and also to take decisions. For me, it was very much about quality. I wasn't for cutting huge corners for what was to be our national parliament.
Yeah, well, except it would be 3 or 4 metres height, so it would be...
No, but... Look, he's cracked it. Oh, that's cracked.
Within a month of the Progress Group starting, tragic and unexpected news hit the project.
Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the man who designed the Scottish Parliament has died.
Leading the news tonight, the architect of the Holyrood Parliament building, Enric Morales, is dead.
And in Newsnight Scotland, as Edinburgh and Barcelona come to terms with the sudden death of the architect Enric Morales, we ask what it will mean for the...
Morales had been ill since April and sadly died of a brain tumour aged 45.
There was a huge concern that the death of the architect would have a very damaging impact upon the project, not least because he was not a hands-off, remote, grand design man. He had designed every single aspect, and it was felt that his absence would be a real tragedy.
Officials at the Scottish Parliament have been quick to insist Mr Morales' death will have little effect on the project, as it's now well past the design stage.
The project will go ahead on the latest designs, which had only just been approved just a couple of weeks ago. So we're now very confident that we will have a building of great international distinction, which is to last more than 100 years, and that will indeed be a tribute to his memory.
In another devastating blow, 3 months later, tragedy struck again.
Good evening. Donald Dewar died at 18 minutes past 12 this afternoon in the intensive care unit of Edinburgh's Western General.
It wasn't long after Enric Morales died that Donald Dewar died. That was an absolutely huge shock for everyone.
He questioned the title Father of the Nation, but he was, without question, the Father of the Parliament.
And I think people will remember him as a man of unshakable integrity, a towering figure whose commitment to decency and social justice were the rock upon which a lifetime of public service was built.
No one would have been more bemused at the fuss made about his death than Donald Dewar himself.
I'm not sure that the Scottish Parliament recovered for a number of years. So that was a catastrophe. You know, for us to lose our First Minister in those circumstances was desperately sad. And it really knocked the stuffing out of the institution for the first few years.
Despite the loss of the project's 2 main players, work continued, and unable to find a solution to the escalating costs, MSPs voted to remove the budgetary cap.
I think if you want to look at the real main fundamental problem at the heart of the building, it was that it was being designed by committee.
You had politicians who just did not know what they were doing. They refused to save costs and just refused to get this project back on the road.
So you had another debate, which was slates versus pantiles. Should the roof be pantiles, you know, the little curved things that you occasionally see in villages in Fife, or should it be slates? And they were arguing vigorously with each other. You know what they ended up doing? Using both.
By 2003, the cost of the building had reached almost £338 million. Set up by the First Minister and presiding officer, an inquiry led by Lord Fraser of Carmiley was opened in 2004 to find out what had gone wrong.
I think Lord Fraser said that there was no smoking gun. I think that was his precise term. There was nobody particularly to blame. It was the interaction of various forces that were to blame. I think that happens to be true.
And what came out from the Fraser inquiry was basically it was a rush job with the wrong kind of contracting.
But at the end of the day, no one, not a single person, politician, civil servant, architect, builder, was held responsible for a tenfold increase in the cost of Scotland's Parliament.
In October 2004, the controversial Holyrood building finally had its grand opening.
Officially at home, the representatives of Scotland, the MSPs, the Crown of Scotland and members of the community of Scotland, ordinary people.
Welcome to Holyrood. Welcome to the new Scots Parliament.
The opening of the building was quite superb. It wasn't that all the concerns were forgotten, but they set those aside.
Certainly, this new Parliament building has had a difficult and controversial birth.
I remember sitting beside John Swinney and he said to me, "Do you know, this is much more homely than I ever thought it was going to be. It feels really good." And that made me quite happy.
3 years late, and with a final tally of £414 million, Scotland's award-winning Holyrood Parliament building has finally found its place.
It is now inconceivable that there could be a Scotland without a devolved Parliament. In my view, it is also inconceivable that it could be anywhere but at Holyrood. It's become a generic term for Scottish politics, and I generally find that people who visit it come in very sceptical, perhaps with memories of the 414 million ultimate costs and the 3-year delay, but they become entranced by it.
I think that it's nice from the inside. I mean, the mobile phone reception's pretty lousy. I just don't think it was justified, really, to shell out that amount of public money on an iconic building, but I don't think devolution really needed that.
I think that although the Parliament is now settled, I think it has taken a long time for the political psyche in Scotland to recover, much longer than it has taken to pay the costs off.
So I think people have generally accepted that that is their Parliament and that it's there to stay.
In the 1980s, Glasgow was struggling with a reputation for organised crime and gang warfare. One key figure in the city's underworld was Arthur Thompson, the man often described as Glasgow's godfather.
Arthur Thompson was very much the old guard. He'd come up in the 40s and 50s. He was the friend of the Crays in London, but he was very much the old style kind of Glasgow criminal.
In the 80s, one young man was building a fearsome reputation that attracted the attention of Thompson. His name was Paul Ferris, and he would soon be a key figure in Thompson's criminal empire.
Paul Ferris was a well-known criminal, a violent man by his own admission. You've got to remember, this man was feared around the country.
He became part of Arthur Thompson's gang and became known as an enforcer. An enforcer is somebody who will do the hard work, the violent work, who will go out and threaten and, when necessary, mete out the violence.
By the early 90s, Thompson's oldest son, Arthur Jr., known as Fat Boy, was rising up the ranks to take over from his father.
Arthur Thompson Jr. went into the family business. From what I understand, not a chip off the old block at all. He wasn't even a shaving off of that block. He didn't have the respect, he didn't command the respect in the life that his father had and still did. Paul Ferris was a contemporary, if you like, of Arthur Thompson Jr., so they had worked together in the business, but they had, from what I understand, a falling out. Paul Ferris blamed Arthur Thompson for essentially fitting him up on a charge which led to a conviction.
On the 18th of August 1991, Arthur Thompson Jr. was shot outside the family home.
Mr. Thompson, serving an 11-year sentence for possessing heroin with intent to supply, was home and leave from Northern-side Open Prison near Forfar. He was shot while walking the short distance from his parents' house to his own home at Provan Mill Road, Black Hill, late on Saturday night.
We are making an appeal to members of the public who may have been in the area of Provan Mill Road about between 11 o'clock and 11:30 on Saturday night to come forward, may have seen something.
Paul Ferris was living in England at the time, but had travelled to Glasgow that night.
Ferris was implicated in that crime. It was alleged that he did the shooting because he had fallen out with the family. Mr. Ferris naturally denied it.
There was a heavy police presence here at Glasgow Sheriff Court this afternoon when 28-year-old Paul Ferris appeared before Sheriff Alexander Eccles. Ferris of Hugginfield Street in Black Hill is alleged to have gunned down convicted drugs dealer Arthur Thompson outside his home in Provan Mill Road on August the 17th. The charge states that Ferris repeatedly discharged a loaded firearm at Arthur Thompson and shot him in the head and body, whereby he was so severely injured he died afterwards in hospital, and that he murdered him.
On the day of Arthur Thompson Jr.'s funeral, Paul Ferris's known associates, Bobby Glover and Joe Hanlon, were found dead in a car.
It was claimed that the two men were involved in the hit, as it was, and that this was quite a stunning piece of theatricality on the part of somebody. Certainly added grist to the mill for the press and the media in general, because this was Glasgow's gangland at its best or worst, depending on which way you look at it.
Detectives investigating the gangland killings of 3 men in Glasgow have warned that a violent feud among the city's drug dealers could lead to more assassinations.
Police say residents have been warned not to help them with their inquiries into the murders.
We know for a fact that the close family of a recent murder victim have been told, do not cooperate with the police.
In March 1992, Paul Ferris's trial for the murder of Arthur Thompson Jr. began.
Mr. Ferris is charged with 10 offences, including murder, attempted murder and a contravention of the Misuse of Drugs Act. He denies all charges.
Being in court for that trial was quite interesting. Also, the people that were there. There were a lot of men with broad faces and no neck and tight haircuts. Some of those faces were no strangers to the fist or the blade. And they were listening intently to what was being said, leaning forward and wee comment here and there. And, most of the public gallery was filled with people like that.
Arthur Thompson Sr. was a key witness at the trial.
The 61-year-old witness, who describes himself as unemployed and on sickness benefit for 2 years, was told by Mr. Finlay it might be suggested he arranged or orchestrated the deaths of Joe Hanlon and Bobby Glover in revenge for his son's death. When asked what he had to say to that, Mr. Thompson replied angrily, "I would say I was on trial here the way you're going." Looking at the dock, he added, "That is the dock. This is the witness box."
The main prosecution witness in the trial also proved to be controversial.
The main point of evidence seemed to be that of a man called Woodman, who it turned out was something of a supergrass and had given evidence in 5 or 6 other trials in England. And what he said was that they were together in the segregation unit in Berlin prison. So they're in separate cells. They can't see each other. They can't see outside. They don't know what's going on outside either. But according to the testimony, during this period of time, Paul Ferris confessed to killing Arthur Thompson Jr. Now, Paul Ferris was an experienced guy in the life. he knew his way around. I cannot believe that somebody like him would confess to a complete stranger who he can't even see by shouting out to him without knowing who is standing outside his door, listening or recording what's being said. I just can't accept that. And yet, this was led as evidence, and a very important evidence in the prosecution's case. Who thought that was a good idea?
Over 300 witnesses were called to give evidence in the 54-day trial that cost £4 million, making it the longest, most expensive trial in Scottish history at the time.
The thing about this trial, the thing about a lot of these trials is it was peppered with liars and half-truths. There was so many people, giving evidence and telling lies that it would be difficult to get through to the truth. The poor jury must have been scratching their head sometimes as to, did that happen? Is that the case? Was this true? And having to come to some sort of decision.
The day started quietly outside the court, but in the near certainty of the end of the trial, people started to gather on the edge of Glasgow Green facing the court.
After 24 hours, the jury acquitted Paul Ferris of the murder of Arthur Thompson Jr.
Paul Ferris emerged into the sunlight on the steps of the High Court in Glasgow for the first time since his arrest 6 months ago.
I'm just glad that the jury vindicated me for the charges, and I think basically a public inquiry is in order.
I think they reached the correct decision because the evidence just wasn't there.
What plans do you have now? What are you planning to do now, Paul? Enjoy myself.
That sort of public money should not be thrown away. And it was thrown away. If they've really believed that Paul Ferris was guilty of murder, then they should have got better evidence than they did. To have a trial of that length, to cost that amount of money, to have the evidence being presented being so weak, I think the only word you can use is scandal.
It's nearly 30 years since Arthur Thompson Jr. was shot, and his murder case remains unsolved. Paul Ferris says he has now turned his back on a life of crime.